Within the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, there are protections explicitly for the freedom of the press. The media, as the so-called Fourth Estate, are meant to provide oversight and shine the light of truth on the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government. This exercise in transparency has proven essential to our democracy. And while there's no shortage of talking heads and clashing rhetoric in the current 24-hour news cycle, access to local news has dramatically declined. That storytelling chasm has impacted not only news, but community interests, issues, and underrepresented voices. In many ways, independent media have filled the void with community media, cultivating citizen journalists at the most cellular level. In this BRIC Town Hall special, we're asking what is the future of local journalism and the role of community media in advancing this core tenet of democracy. Welcome to Empowering Democracy Through Community Media, a Be Heard Town Hall. Now the music. That's right, this is the Be Heard Town Hall on democracy and community media. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to everyone here at BRIC House for being here tonight. We appreciate you making the time to have a conversation that is vital to our democracy and our communities. And we've assembled some of the smartest people we know to talk directly to that, but look forward to adding all of your voices, both in the room and online, to the conversation. But before we begin in earnest, let me introduce you to our panelists for tonight. I'm starting with Mikael Simmons, the Executive Director of the Center for Community Media. Thanks for being here, Mikael.
Thank you for having me.
All right, we've got a hometown hero in our midst. Maritza Carmona is the Senior Director of Government and External Affairs right here at BRIC Arts Media. Thanks for working late with us tonight.
Of course.
All right, we're going back over here and say happy and welcome to Mike Wassenaar, the President and CEO of the Alliance for Community Media. Thanks for joining us,
Good
Mike.
to be here.
Saying more than a few words tonight. All right, and now I'm looking at Gary Pierre, who's the publisher, founder, the man who's the engine behind what is an essential piece of publication for a lot of us here in the city and across the country, the Haitian Times. Thanks for joining us, Gary. Happy to have you. And we have one of the other hometown heroes here, a longtime community producer and member of the family here at BRIC, Astruge McLean, who's a producer, stage manager, and editor. Thanks for joining us. We pulled you to the other side of the camera. I hope you feel comfortable. All right, and finally, Leon Taylor is here. Leon serves as the Director of Community Media right here at BRIC Arts Media. So please give them a welcome. Let them know that we appreciate the time. All right, so again, thank you all for being here. But I know in the opening we talked a little bit about community media, local media, independent media. But as we're sitting here now at BRIC House, a place where community media is paramount, I would love to ask each of you what your working definition of community media is now, with half of us walking around with mobile production units in our pocket, or waiting upstairs to check out equipment, or being in a class to learn ways to disseminate media. So, Mikael, what is your working definition of community media as it stands right now?
That's a great question. A lot of people have different definitions. We work with media that really defines their own communities. So we're talking about immigrant media, media that have communities that speak the same language, communities that have come together. It's not always geographic. We work with the Haitian Times, and the Haitian diaspora is not just in one place. They're across the United States. We work with media that's produced in Bangla. production, just TV and radio, not just print. They're usually small, they're usually independent, and they're usually the final source or the best source for news in their own community, for what they care about in a way they can consume it.
So Gary, he invoked your baby's name there, so I'm looking at you right now. How are you defining community media from your long view of being around and in it for so long?
Well, I think Mikhail really nailed it. To use Rachel Maddow's sort of, how did I do? Seriously, there's been a lot of conversation in the space about where do we fit? Because the narrative was that it had to be geographic. You had to cover Brooklyn or Queens. And we felt like, well, if we do that, we're going to go out of business because those communities are declining population. People are moving to the Midwest. As you all heard the last month almost, it seems like forever for me, where the Haitian community there has been part of the news cycle. And we were covering that even before this happened. So in many ways, if you say that I have to cover Brooklyn, I want to cover Brooklyn. I love Brooklyn. But stories are everywhere, and we have to be there because, the Haitian community is relatively new, maybe 40 years in this country in significant numbers. So we're still going through some things and understanding the complexities of America. Right. And so I, as someone who was born in Haiti but came here when I was a young boy, I just felt that I understand it. I don't know if I do or not, but I think I do. And I'm going to be that guide to be there with the community as we make our journey. We started in the 90s here in New York in large numbers, and now we're expanding. And so the community media has to be there.
Community as defined beyond the borders of the map, but right to the heart of the culture too.
Yes.
So Estruge, you have been in it, of it, you've made it, you've watched it. What is your working definition of community media?
I think I have a very, like you said, now, especially after the pandemic, it's a little bit different than before. But in my case, it's still, to me, it gives a voice to our community, where in mainstream media, you really don't have that. And to me, it's a little bit more honest, because it's from us. It's pure. It's from, what your neighbors are saying, so to speaking. So for me, that is what community media is. The fact that now, like you said, we have different technology where, people are doing it here, but they still come back to where they want to broadcast it. And this is the ideal format to do it, where people still saying if they want to hear more about Brooklyn or even more about Manhattan, they will go to a community channel rather than the mainstream, because you're not going to hear it unless there's a special on television that's going to talk about something specific.
So I'm looking down here at you now, listening to what I just heard immediately and the things that preceded it. I wonder about the working definition that you take into government and external affairs to make them realize what is at stake and what's happening in community media. So what's the definition that you share when you're in those rooms, Marissa?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think as the head of government affairs, I think of community media as physical spaces for people to organize, to meet and to organize, and to be able to gain the tools, get access to the tools to help them tell their stories. And so a place also for them to tell those stories, to share those stories with their elected officials. It's a place for our representatives to have direct access with the communities, to be grounded in community, and to be able to share that information, for it to flow freely at the very most local level.
So Leon, you're right next to me, and you happen to be the director of community media. So I can't imagine how this is not in your job description to know exactly what it is and the parameters you put around community media.
Well, I think it's everything that everyone has shared. I mean, it's the physical space where community comes together, learns the tools of media to be empowered by them, work together to create content that they value and want to share with their neighbors. And then it's that content that tells each person's story that gets out there into the community and informs them or excites them and makes them feel connected. And those stories are diverse, different languages, things that you aren't always finding in the mainstream. What you find on community media channels, it's Creole, it's in Spanish, it's stories on LGBT community being told in depth before the mainstream is willing to share it in its totality. And it's informative. What I love about community media most is where electeds can come and let their constituents know what it is they're running on, what their values are, so the community can make educated decisions on who they elect to represent them. So that's community to me. It's everything that represents that our values, our information, our connected nature to each other. And you're using the tools as they evolve, like the technology, that is often commercialized to tell the story because you care and you know it matters.
So Mike, sorry that you came last, but what hasn't been said?
Well, I think one of the things that I think about with a definition of community media is that it's media that's produced authentically by, for, and about communities. And the question that I have is, what is my community or communities? I can be in a place, but I can also have a heritage. I can have a history, I can have relationships, I could be an alumni with a college or something. So the communities that I'm a part of have like a multiplicity of levels. So when we think about community media, we have to be thinking about sort of the continuum of practice that we see across the United States. You know, the independent organizations, the businesses that are doing the vital work that you're talking about, the nonprofit organizations that are acting as art centers and centers for expression at the local level. In small townships across the United States, community media happens actually from local government perspective. It looks a lot more like a library than an art center, right? Because most of the work of the civic population is done by volunteers, right? So depending upon the community that you're in, community media can look very, very different depending upon people's heritage, their histories, and what's important to them, right? I think the other thing that's kind of important is that community media is something that has to be fought for, and it's something that doesn't just sort of come to us from the skies. It's something that you have to work to create. It's like businesses you have to create, but then also it's like there's like sets of policies that inform, you know, the fact that they exist, and it's people that drive that work. It's people that created policies in the United States to have community media flourish and flower. And it's people, at the end of the day, that can determine whether or not it has a future, it seems to me. It's like we have to be meaningful in people's lives. I mean, that's what you do when you're doing publishing. You have to be thinking about telling a story for somebody, right? With somebody. So that's kind of how I think about community media. So I'm trying to weave a lot together there.
Well, there's a lot to be woven together, just like community media. There's a lot of points of entry and expression in the thing. So I'm looking at you and wondering what your path was to a successful show that ran for a decade and was so impactful in the community. So I would love to hear about your entry point into the world of community media.
Well,
What kept you?
well, the way I started was when I got out of college, I knew what I wanted to be. I can admit that now. Then I couldn't. But when I got into it was BCAT then. And
Legacy piece. There's a lot of folks in the room.
Yeah, there's a few
remember
of
the
them.
cat. Yeah.
When it was VCAT. And so talking about old school, if you remember the editing suites with the tube tape and you're trying to like cut and all that, that's when I entered this field. But then I got hired later on in an adoption agency that focused on adopting older teens, which is, as you know, the hardest group to get adopted. And our director, he was also a member of BCAT then, and so he created shows, lots of shows. So he would come in and they would film like 3 or 4 films, shows at the same time, and he used to edit that. But it was like basic stuff, basic stuff. And then BRIC when it became BRIC started to reach out to a lot of non-for-profit, and they offered a grant. And the grant was why do you think you can use BRIC services better? And what they did was they brought us, if you got accepted, we had gotten the grant, they brought us in and they showed us and mentored us into how to create a great show, a better show. And so the reason why we used BRIC was because we used BRIC as a tool. It was one of the many different tools we used in order for people to learn about the agency, in order for people to learn about the children that is trying to be adopted in their voice. So we gave a voice to the children. We gave a voice to the parents, the grandparents, who also were part of this whole dynamic of adoption. And so we did that for a long time. And when we did these shows, we had somebody, it's always like, if you're interested in adoption, dial, call this number. And so what it allowed us to do was to reach out to a more bigger audience. And so people would call up and say, hey, I saw you on BRIC. I'd like to know more about your organization. And we would say, well, come in and learn. So that's how we got started, and we end up with a lot of shows. So it was really thanks to the BRIC vision of trying to say, you know what, we have a tool. Let's work better with our community, and this is how we're gonna do it. And it worked out for a lot of not-for-profits. It worked out.
So I happen to know that this was part of the Media Share grant program, looking at exactly what you said, putting a call out to organizations, nonprofits in the community to say, hey, let's put our chocolate with your peanut butter and do some great things. So I wonder how that happens and continues to happen in the current environment, Leon.
That happens because you have a staff that's constantly looking at what community is doing and finding better ways to support it. So when they initially came in, they were coming in as an independent organization, doing it on its own. But as a staff, we realized there was an extra level of support that was needed to get it to where it could be. Elevate the program and the messaging they were looking to do, and to elevate that organization so that it serves the community better. And I think that we continue to do that in a variety of ways. So that was one of the first programs that evolved out of this idea of creating something that is designed with a certain level of intention to support a particular kind of user. But we get a variety of users who tell stories in different ways. Some people wanted to be documentarians. And so we developed a short documentary program where you've got people who are relatively new to media who work with our staff and a small group of other folks. They learn that skill and they're able to elevate the story that they're telling and share it with the community. And so we're beginning to match the mainstream, but we're doing it with the people who walk in our door, who are in the community, who maybe didn't go to college for it, and they're able to tell their stories. We're doing that with podcasting as well. And so we're looking at how the medium evolves. We're looking at our community and what their needs are. And each time we see what is needed, we're looking inward and saying, well, what can we add to what our offerings are to make sure that the resources are there, the consistency is there, and the support is there, and the growth in what people are producing is there. Because when people see what Estruge was able to do, they say, I want to be a part of that program. You get more nonprofits coming in, amplifying their desire to do good in the community. When you get individuals coming through a documentary program, individuals who maybe thought they couldn't do it and have a story to tell, they come and they participate, and then you're getting more stories that really represent the community. You know, it's like when you hear mainstream, the idea is like they want to tell the community story. Well, the best people to do that is the community. They just need the support. And, you know, community media and public access started with a basic idea of, we're going to give you equipment, we're going to give you channel time, we're going to give you access. But like everything else, it's like when you're doing something that has such value, you want it to evolve to be the very best that it can be in its iteration. And so over time, we've developed other programs that meet the needs of different kinds of users. And we continue to assess that, not just on the programmatic end, but also on the technology end. because we know technology is evolving. And community media has to meet that need for its users to where they're getting their content in the palm of their hand, they're connecting with each other and us in the palm of their hand. They're building the kind of networks that are available to other people to support their needs, all through a cell phone or a mobile device.
And I can attest, I jumped from doing a show into the documentary world, which scared the hell out of me, and ended up loving it to the point where, I ended up putting another documentary in another festival. So it was magic for me because it was a world that I wasn't, when I started, didn't think I would ever do.
Yeah.
I was always afraid of that cutting, editing part, like, no, I love my film. No, cut. So I fell in love now with documentary shorts, and I challenge myself all the time. Can I make another documentary in 4 minutes? That sort of thing.
So, Gary, a moment ago, Leon mentioned looking within and then being able to serve the community. And I know just earlier you talked about defying the boundaries of the physical plant. So I would love to hear about your point of entry and the moves that you've made from all of the major media to being at the head of media that is so important, vital, and authentic right now in this moment that we're in.
Well, this is a very complicated question for me because I was a reporter at the New York Times covering New York. I did police beat. I did international stuff. But I got into journalism to write about people. And in these big places, the people are just props. And at the same time, I saw an opportunity here in my community that was making a transformation from an exile group to an immigrant group, and it didn't have the media that I thought necessary. And so I left the Times to start the Asian Times. And immediately after I joined the Asian Times, I became part of at the time, we proudly called it ethnic media, and ecosystem, and I played a leadership role on it. And during my time talking to some experts, one particular professor at Ohio University told me, unless academia started looking at ethnic media, we're just wasting our time. So I schemed for like 10 years. And then when the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism was opening, then I latched and I convinced them that, hey, let's start the center. And that center has played a role. I left, I'm a founder, and so once the thing is done, I'm gone. So now this young man over here is running it. And so it's something that's visceral and personal to me because I think the power that we have as communicators is very immense, and we should use that for good to build communities. And so that's my journey in it.
Before we move on, can I just ask you for a minute to pull on the thread of what that expert told you about what the loss of ethnic media means? Like, if they don't get onto ethnic media, what happens in the broader landscape?
It dies. Communities can't really grow. They don't have any guidance. Like right now, at the moment that in which we're speaking, there is a chronic need for media in these different communities where new Americans are coming. I mean, I'm trying hard, but I'm telling you, the need there is acute. And so this is some of the problems that's happening. And some of them, unfortunately, are being sort of like politicized and just really not addressing the issues. But you need media, like we're talking about, to air out the real story. And I think we were able to do that at the Haitian Times. And I think a lot of our colleagues just follow some of our reporting. Yeah. And then, I don't know if they follow it, but at least they had another point of view out there to consider as they're putting their segments together, as they're writing their articles.
It's definitely source material for the stuff that makes its way into the other pages and airtime on those networks. So, Mike and Mikael.
I mean, the thing that strikes me about what you're describing is the bad experience that folks have when an institution, typically the press, shows up, right? Everyone in the room has had that experience.
On the worst day of your life.
Worst day of your life, it's not a good day for a press conference, right? And I think that that's like the uniform description of people's relationship with press institutions in the first place, separate from this other thing that you're talking about in terms of the racial and ethnic barriers that exist within those institutions. When you overlay that with, I mean, I hate this term, like the thousands of communities that have been defined as flyover country, as being of no interest, you create this sort of toxic brew of folks that distrust information, are susceptible for manipulation. And you know, it's true when someone shows up with a microphone and a camera, something bad has happened in your community. We see this in small towns across America, suburbs, exurbs across America. We see this in neighborhoods here in Brooklyn, certainly, right? That's the experience. That's everyone's experience, and that's because the media is not ours. It is not of us. It seems like it's an alien thing. And the thing that's odd about that, to my mind, is that there's this long tradition in America of the press being representative of the people. I mean, that's the background for the so-called ethnic press, is basically representing the needs of folks in the 19th century who had like basic information needs. I think one of the largest Swedish language newspapers in the world was in Brooklyn over 100 years ago, right? You know, so that's like a public tradition of like intellectual love for community that we ignore when we talk about the press. Because it's not about big institutions. It's about giving people information they can use in their lives, whether it be a small business, a church, a synagogue, a mosque, helping somebody to connect with another person. That's the work we see like in community media centers across the United States. But it's also the work that like different independent press in different diaspora do as well, right? I mean, so it's a common goal of like love of community that drives the work. And I mean, that's the thing I think is very, very, it strikes me when you're telling your story, is that dichotomy exists between these, what we think of as like these big institutions and the need that we all have to be seen, right?
Yeah, plus one to everything you said, community media is interesting. Mainstream media is really the tongue crier, community media is the tongue square, right? You have a conversation here. You're in conversation with the people who produce the news. You push back, they push back at you, but now you're in the community, not reporting on the community itself. Community media is also the last line of defense for news deserts, right? When they disappear, there's no one translating these stories for that community, and there's no one telling the stories of the community to other people. And I'm not just talking about today for tomorrow. I'm talking about historically. The Amsterdam News in Harlem is 116 years old. Their archive is amazing. So how do you know who you are? It's the stories we tell of ourselves, not how other people tell stories about us. Community media is needed for democracy because everyone's voice needs to be heard, not agreed upon, but actually understand what's happening. What makes a difference when your kids have to go to school tomorrow? The cost of your electricity when it's too hot because of climate change. Yeah, we could talk about it in a big way, but if you think about the heat island effect, that is where you live right now, and community media is not just speaking to you, but also speaking for you.
Maritza, I'm listening to Mikael talk about this idea of a media desert. And there have to be people who might be yelling at whatever the device they're holding is right now saying, media desert, I got news in my pocket, I got news on my iPod, I got news everywhere. How do you fight against this idea that there could never be a media desert because there's someone on this channel talking 24 hours a day? If you're in in an external capacity or talking to electeds or trying to keep the lights on in community media. And they're like, news is everywhere. What do you mean media news desert?
I mean, I think that just ask someone, who is your local council member? Or what does the community board do? Or how do you get a bike lane installed on your street? Most people don't know that information, don't know who to go to. And we have the internet, right? We have Google. But if, it's a easy search, but just like intuitively, we don't know. We're not taught civics like that in our public schools. And I think places like this, like BRIC, even with all the access to all the information online, I think people are still craving that connection, that immediately connection and access to their representatives, and to better understand the issues, and to be empowered to have conversations and have dialogue, like we're talking about issues that matter to them. And so we can say, yes, even in places, we talk about the Midwest, and we're in a place like New York, which is like the media capital of the world, right? We are still incredibly disconnected from our representatives, our people who are making decisions for us. And so I think places really like BRIC and community media centers have a tremendous role to play in making those connections and creating the spaces, both physical on the platform, and then making that information available, online and digitally, for folks to benefit from. So I would push back on that tremendously.
I know Gary.
I wanted to add to this is that I think people tend to misunderstand the difference between having these devices. That's a hardware, but you need the software, we need the information. And those informations are not available as they should be. For instance, if you look at Bronzeville, East New York, who's telling that story?
There's this amazing supercut of the evening news of the top 50 markets in the United States. and they're all like they're all chain broadcasters.
And it's meant to
and
be
it's the
local
same,
for your
it's
community.
the local news,
Right.
and it's the same script in every community, right? So there's a serialization that's occurring there. The other metaphor I end up using is I'm in a boat in the ocean and I'm dying of thirst. I'm surrounded by water that I can't drink, right? I need something that's useful in my life, useful to my soul, useful to my community. But I'm getting junk, salt water, right? And people, so I think people can understand this idea of like being inundated with information, but none of it's useful.
Yeah, we have a lot of media, we don't have a lot of news, right? I think media is an umbrella, and you could go into entertainment, you could go into video games, there's a lot of it, but we need more news, and then to be more specific, news you could use. And the fact of the matter is, even if you get that information, there's a question of trust. That's there too. 3 people could tell you the same thing. That doesn't mean you trust all 3 people. And community media really has that trust and is there to build that trust. So sometimes you may have heard it scrolling through WhatsApp or going on social media, but when you're like, okay, I got this from an outlet I trust because I've built a relationship there, and they're also telling me this story in the way that makes sense to me. And I'm not just talking about a language barrier, I'm just talking about the things you highlight in a story that make a difference. Like that's what you feel community media is not just a word, it's like a verb in a sense.
Yeah, I think it's localizing subject matter so that you connect with it and understand it in your world. And you trust the person that it's coming from. It's like if you look at a lot of folks who watch our channels, they trust democracy now, right? They know that it's local. They know that it's not influenced by corporate media. They're not getting it pushed to them because of the algorithm. It's trustworthy. It's local. They can tune into it and know that it's not something that someone's trying to convince them to do because of some commercial interest.
And I think the other thing, I really hate to say this, because I know we're supposed to be provocative and sexy on tonight's discussion.
We'd like it.
We'd
but-
like, I understand. Oh my God. How tragic you'd be bored by seeing a city council meeting,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
It's important that we actually monitor what's going on in the world if we believe that democracy is worthwhile, as opposed to we're all like on a thrill ride in Disneyland. It's been fun. Let's go have some more fun, right? There are like issues that pertain to the lives of things we care about. My job, my family, safety in the community, opportunities for my children. All those things are things you can monitor through, feeds that come through community media outlets around the country. It's like a vital underlayment of information that you need. It's not the be-all and end-all, but unless you have it, you're not actively a part of our democracy. And that's the thing I think that we have to be thinking about building, is building that for all communities, right? So people have information they can trust, and oversight for local government, which is a good thing, right? And you've got resources to be able to make that happen in communities that are big and small. I think that's going to be the trick that we have to look at.
So in this election year, such as it is, in this political environment, in this city right now with what we're in the midst of, I wonder if any of you would be interested in drawing a line from that sort of Sinclairization of the news from the top down, that supercut when you see 50 communities in 50 states and they lead off saying the same thing in every individual that has nothing connected but maybe a border next to it, and the current political climate that we're in right now? Is there a line between that corporatization that gets us to where we are, where the voice of community media may matter more than ever, if that's the news desert we're in?
I would argue that's a bad business model, because it doesn't really, it's almost like the USA Today of news, Gannett. That's the model. If you look at St. Louis Post-Dispatch, Indianapolis Star, all these papers that Gannett acquired, they had their own identity. Now I call them the blue dot special. Everybody had that blue dot in their logo, and they changed it. And it's really soulless. Yeah. And I know it's a business. I'm an entrepreneur, but I prefer to be a mission-driven place.
I mean, it's curious you talk about mission, because you can be a for-profit business or a nonprofit, and mission matters. Is the mission making more money? Or is the mission serving an audience? What is it? And I think, unfortunately, for a lot of large outlets, it's about stock prices and buyouts and trying to flip the organization for the next merger, right? It's not about the service to community. That's not the mission. The mission is money.
I was just at the NBC headquarters today. I teach a class at City College. And I took them on a tour there, and I was thinking to myself, this place has a lot of money to waste. It was a lot, and I was so jealous. My resources, just give me a little bit, just a little bit of that, and I could do a lot of good.
But at the same time, we keep hearing the news and seeing the headlines about they're laying off this many people. There's another round of layoffs, and these media people are coming back, and this is shrinking, and the conglomerates are owning them, and more there's sort of one voice and one central control lane for our media. I wonder how much of a counter community media is to those folks who got a lot of money but are claiming broke a lot as well.
But I mean, let's face it, like, these media outlets have power, they have reach, and if you get some good reporting out of that, it could do a lot of good. I mean, the way that people will react to a story on CNN, it's just unbelievable. And we can never have that. But there's a need for that, though. Right. There's a need for that, because they can amplify voices. The bottom line is that they need to care about communities more than they do. It's not just about the business, for the most part. It's also about community in a larger definition of the word. Yeah. Because we are at this inflection point of our democracy where it's really in danger. It's been backsliding. And part of that is we talked about is the mainstream media not really understanding what, can I say his name? Donald Trump was really about.
Trigger warning.
And when they figured it out, it was too late. And now they're still scrambling on how to cover it. But this is important. We can't do that job. That's not our role. As community media, we have ours, but we need to hold them accountable for doing their part, because they're the big machines. Thank you.
And to add to that, you know, we need a robust media ecosystem, right? Everyone playing different roles, as Gary said. If you're a large organization, there are things you can do that others can't do. But in a robust media ecosystem, community media is feeding into that. And there are times throughout history, and I'm not saying there was ever a perfect time, but one of the things community media has historically done is challenge mainstream media's narrative about themselves. And when I say that, when I mentioned at the beginning, communities are not necessarily a geographic barrier. The point there is, if you're thinking about the Latino community, that is national, and that's communities within one, right? So when you have conversations about politics and you're saying, hey, the majority of people who identify as Latino in the United States are citizens, that changes the whole conversation about immigration, which is usually how it's framed in mainstream media. The black press historically has pushed back against mis and disinformation in mainstream media by saying black people are equal. Gasp. But there are community media outlets for over 100 years that have been pushing back against that mainstream work. So a proper ecosystem that, when you think about large or small, print, broadcast, social media, TikTok, it doesn't matter, informs each other to be better. And I think part of the polarization right now is that we have singular narratives and we're not informing each other and having much more nuanced conversations, which happens in communities because we live in the United States with multiple communities that make a bigger community overall.
So I've been hearing some nods of agreement and even an assist up here from you all here at BRIC House. So if you do have a question or you want to jump in on the conversation, you can make your way to either side and bring some community into our town hall, bring the town in at any moment. So make your way over to the side if you want to inject. We can get a microphone to you, Mr.
That, especially, I mean, working on the other side, sometimes I feel a lot of the mainstream media is also driven, and you know, by the corporate America, right? When they have to sell their spots for advertisers and stuff like that. Advertisers is going to go where the majority of audience is being drawn for that particular show or particular thing. So for me, that's where my mistrust comes into play, because now I see it on the other side, how it kind of works, and I'm like, what am I really listening to? Am I listening to something that will try to draw the majority of audience, or am I really listening to the truth? And that always, for me now, when I choose who to listen to, I don't have as much as I used to. I now pick and choose, and sometimes I even go to international news to hear whether I'm hearing the correct news on this side.
You know, one last sort of political point, if I can. It's got to be, we've got to just kind of call this out, that there's something that's un-American about attacking journalists and attacking the press, right? It's un-American. I'm happy to wave the flag on this one. I'm also happy to say, I mean, I think we're a long ways away from recognizing that civic information should be recognized as a public good. There's like all sorts of things that we invest in America that don't make any economic sense. Public schools. Libraries. Libraries didn't exist in America as a public institution before, say, the 1870s, right? And now you go to big and small communities around the country, and libraries are like some of the most beloved institutions. What was that? That's like an investment in a public good, right? We don't have a politics right now where we talk about useful information in people's lives as a public good. We have a politics where we're beating up on the media and we're demonizing other people rather than saying that the media should be useful and uplifting and help our souls, right? So I think we need to get to a different place in our politics when it comes to media.
So before we jump over here, I just want to say, Maritza, have you had any luck convincing the powers that be in the world that community media is as vital as libraries?
Yeah, I mean, I think that our elected officials, many of our elected officials, many of our representatives, especially the local representatives here in Brooklyn, are aware of who we are and are supportive and have benefited from our resources, right? We hold town halls like this one where we invite our representatives to speak. We stream their district town halls for them.
Sure.
We do forums. And so many of them have taken our classes, our podcasting classes, have benefited from our certifications. And so I think at the local level, yes, I think many of our electeds are aware, have been around and have supported us, but are unfamiliar with the structures that have historically funded community media, which date back, right, to government legislation. And they are unaware of the risks that we are facing nationally, right, and at the state level, in that we're seeing now a decrease in funding to our centers because of our funding structures. And so that education is what we're working on right now, is bringing them in, of course, telling the story of the impact that we have had for decades, and speaking with them about sustainable sources of funding, and speaking to them about rectifying legislation so that we can help make sure that centers like BRIC in New York City and across the country are here for generations to come. So,
Mr. Bramwell.
This is a beautiful panel. I love everything that was said. I just want to give you one word: veterans. I'm a United States Navy veteran. I belong to the American Legion. One of the problems that we have with the Legion is communication. And community media is communication. Okay, I have a concept for veterans to get their own channel here or wherever. Wherever there's a cable box, there's a veteran in the Veterans Organization. As Strude came here under a partnership program, I worked on every single partnership program here. I'm a BCAT producer also. I also work here as where I work at? Master Control Operator. I forgot.
You blanked it out.
Yeah, on weekends, so, it's not the weekend, so I forget. I'm a disabled veteran. I'm the golden child of BRIC, and I don't mean to say it that way or be, conceited or anything, but this gives veterans hope. Also, they can communicate. The gentleman was talking about community. What's the biggest community out there? Veterans. That's the biggest community out there. I have a gentleman that came, we just met tonight, but mutual person introduced us to each other, and I told him to come on down. He's in uniform, The concept that I have, wherever there's a cable box at, there's a veteran in the Veterans Organization. That's veterans, they're all not-for-profit organizations also. Money comes in through there. The partnership program that Astrude came in on was one of the best things. I worked on every single one of them that was filmed here in BRIC.
You did.
And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your service. Here and there. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, there is the Veteran Journalist Association. And so that's a resource that, if you want, I can give you the information. Because a friend of mine, we were together at Columbia in a program. He was working on that. And so I saw him the other day. He said it's doing really well, so that's resources. So we do, yes, agree that that is a community, and that's why we were talking about community can be all different things. And yes, of course, the military is really strong.
And just to add to that, and as Aaron said, he's a prime example of a product of community media. A veteran who came here, took our classes, learned the skill, was able to work and support a community organization putting its work out there to talk about the good they're doing, and took some of that skill and is now working. And I think that's something that we've talked about in terms of how do we systematically extend that part of community media to veterans organizations and other organizations. Because we're not just a place where you are creating content for yourself, but we're literally teaching you the skills that can be applied to work in mainstream media, if that is your choice, or to work independently. We have a lot of community members who come from working in BRIC to becoming directors of cinematography. You see some on-air talent like Ashley Allison on CNN, who started here as a local producer and journalist. And so our doors open to the community, and we produce. We haven't amplified that, and we've got to do a better job at talking about that and building that network of alumni who've come through these spaces and speak to the value of them. But it's a combination of both skills that can be applied in a variety of ways, both in front of and behind the camera. And I think that in and of itself helps to create a healthy democracy, because what we always talk about is what we see on TV and how that speaks to us and connects to us. So, like, these are the spaces where it really happens.
Absolutely, and your point about in front of and behind the camera, there are people making moves in community media who've been stolen by mainstream media, and some who are holding the line as well, including the woman who's the producer of this show, and in my ear, Ro Johnson, who came through the same program. And
She
is
was
now,
working for our show when
she's
she
been
started.
keeping this train on
Yes.
the track for a number of years now. Thank you, boss. We're going to go right to you.
I'm just wondering how far off can you go from Brooklyn for community media? Specifically, I see two members of the Haitian community coverage here on the panel. And I'm wondering if you have reached out beyond Brooklyn to the Haitian community in Springfield, Ohio, to focus on the racist lies that former President Trump and his VP candidate, J.D. Vance, have spread about Haitians in Springfield, Ohio. And one last part, has there been any crosswind here in Brooklyn that the MAGA group of racists have brought to the Brooklyn Haitian community?
Well, thank you for that question. Yes.
I'm sorry to stop you here. No, please, I just want to point out that where else could this question be answered by an expert? Honestly, this is I've been guilty, applause. But I've been guilty of saying that BRIC is like the Star Wars outpost bar of media, because you're walking down the hall and you never know who you're going to run into, but it's always going to be someone who's authentic, who speaks with their voice and lived experience and is willing to share it with you. But what other platform besides the one that you built, and why the hell your phone has been ringing off the hook since the garbage was spewed? But this is why community media matters, and we go to the source because the source is one of us.
Yes, thank you for that. Well, yes, we have been covering it. In fact, we had a small grant from the American Press Institute and Solutions Journalism Network to cover elections, just to inform people, not try to tell you who to vote for, but here are the information. So at first, we wanted to go to Orlando, just for practical reasons, because our Haiti editor lives in Orlando, so we felt it would be easier. And then Florida has a large community. And our special projects editor said, you know what, I think Springfield, that's where we ought to anchor our coverage. Well, we had been following Springfield for a couple of years now. We've done stories about Springfield's community because, let me give you some context as to why the Haitians are in Springfield and these other places in the Midwest. These states need workers, factories, all kinds of positions that are available. And so oddly enough, it was during Trump that this policy was enacted without anybody knowing that they were bringing these workers to these places who had raised their hands that they said, send us workers. So you have a town of roughly 50,000 people or so, the whole area. And overnight, the last two years, we had 15,000 people moving into that community, putting pressure on social services, hospitals, and schools. So that's the backdrop. We had been talking about that at the Haitian Times, reporting, and then we felt Ohio has a reputation of being a bellwether state, although it's not that much anymore, but so we went there. And we wanted to cover Springfield, not parachute journalism, just dropping in and then grab whatever 2 or 3 quotes and then move out. So we organized, well, at least we wanted to organize a town hall meeting to feel the pain points of the community. Well, the Thursday, we began to hear rumblings that, things are getting pretty hot. By Friday, the city manager and police chief told us they couldn't guarantee our safety. Let that sink in. They couldn't guarantee our safety if we came to Springfield and had that town hall. All we wanted to do was talk. There was no protest. We're not protesting. And so we couldn't do it. So we, of course, using technology, overnight, we moved it online. And we had about 5,000 people listening on. And during this town hall, we started being flooded with vile emails, just things. One email was N-word, that was a subject line. And then it just went on from there. So yes, we have been looking at Springfield, and I mentioned earlier, I just wanted to give my colleagues in the mainstream media a point of view. This is the way we see it as the Haitian Times, and hoping it helped shape the narrative, and I don't know, and so.
So where would that humanizing force and that counter be if not for community media? Literally, what other mechanism would we have? It would just have to rely on
WhatsApp.
All right, there we go.
And
TikTok.
To your point, no, but to your point, it's history, detailed context that you can only get from when you're in the community. The Haitian Times did not have to show up 1 week before, they were already there. They weren't asking, when you look at the Haitian Times' reporting, or you look at community media reporting, they're literally asking a totally different question because the people reading or viewing or observing or hearing already know the basics. They already know what's happening there because you live there. So that's a beautiful aspect of community media, right? Yes, you could talk mainstream and you fly in and they now have to get up to speed, but if you're living there, you have a whole different view of what's going on. You have a whole different set of context. And quite frankly, you start the story at a different place. This story did not start with one announcement by a former president. It happened years ago. And that's the beauty of community media and the reporting that is produced.
So we are going to delve a little bit deeper into looking at the ways in which we keep the lights on so we can keep countering those narratives and talk about funding and really what the source of it is. But before we make that pivot, I would love to finish up with your question for the moment.
It's not so much a question, a comment.
Sure.
I think you mentioned social media and reaching people, and I just wanted to emphasize that it's a dangerous place, social media, because there's a profit motive in keeping your attention there. Okay, and it's not easy, particularly for the younger generation, because they unless they're very active, it's a cesspool, and there's a profit motive to that. So I just wanted to point that out. And the other point was the evil orange one. He's a lot of blame has been put on him. It's not just him. It's a whole institution that profits from racism and hatred. And maintains systems in place that will, maintain that gap, and that gap is growing. The wealth gap, the information gap, and unless we have these very active civic engagements like you guys operate in, So that's the second point. And the third thing is just a plug. I'm at NYU, Brooklyn, a program called ITP. I have my thing is to try to connect with the community directly. So if you go up there, 370J, there's an interactive installation called Power to the People that's highlighting Black Facts from the blackfacts.com website by Ken Graham Mason. He's a Brooklynite. It's a short educational videos that play daily, and some other creative work. There's a poem from Langston Hughes that you can interact with. Let America be America again. So that poem is up there on the big screen. So check it out. Let me know if it works. And it's my attempt to reach a very vulnerable community that I see flowing by there, high school kids that have very little context to deal with this onslaught of misinformation. So that's my commentary. Thank you.
No, thank you for that perspective.
My name is John Henry Thompson. You can Google, look him up, and then come by and say hi if you're ever down at 370J. Okay.
All right.
Okay, take care.
Thank you for the perspective and the plug, Mr. Johnson.
John Henry Thompson.
Thompson. All right, gotcha.
Okay.
So you spoke about those systems a second ago. Well, we happen to know that systems do run on their own, but you got to feed them, and it takes some doing, and it takes some money for those systems that are really grinding us, but it also takes money for the systems that are working in opposition to those and filling in some of the blanks in the landscape. So before we really get into the nitty-gritty of the thing, we do want to make sure that we take care of some business in the form of a little disclaimer that you can see that's on the screen right now. So BRIC TV is committed to the accurate and impartial programming and to ensure that journalistic integrity and trustworthiness of our productions. We strive for transparency about any relationships, initiatives, and/or financial interests that might present a potential conflict of interest. So BRIC is part of a collective of institutions advocating for the Community Media Reinvestment Act, currently before the New York State Legislature. The lawyers made us do it, and we stand by it, but more importantly, the journalism made us do it, because we are community media, we are of you, and we are transparent and letting you know exactly where we stand. And I'm looking at Maritza over here. There were a lot of words on the screen. There's a lot of sound and fury about legislation that might do well to help places like BRIC stay in a community resource in a position to be everything that they are to their community. So could you just, Reader's Digest, what that legislation could mean for our community?
Yeah, sure, of course. So, there's a bill right now in the Senate and Assembly that is known as the Community Media Reinvestment Act that would create a fund that would bring resources to community media centers, to state and to municipalities. And it addresses the need to tax streaming services, and to bring that funding back into the states, into the cities, and into community media centers. Iterations of this bill exist and have passed in other states. I think that beyond this bill, right, and we've gotten some support. We have over 60 sponsors on this bill. We have talked to our elected officials. Again, a lot of this process is an education process.
Sure.
And a lot of folks are unfamiliar with the funding structures of community media and public access centers in New York and across the country. And I know, Mike, you can speak a little bit more to this and to where we have seen some successes with this. And so, to pass a bill, it takes years and a lot of work and coalition building and, communication campaigns. And so we are in that process. We have embarked on that process with our community producers, with our local partners, to educate our representatives who are our allies, right, and who have been supportive of BRIC. And we want to work with them to get to a place where, again, we can sustain our operations for generations. I think beyond the legislation, though, and this is something we've talked about a lot, is looking at other sustainable sources of funding that go beyond our cable franchise fees and that go beyond a bill, right? Because this can take years. But looking at, our foundations, our corporations, even having conversations and dialogue and our stronger relationships with the cable companies, I would just say that there is a benefit to being a cable subscriber. It's places like BRIC, right? And so going beyond that, I'd say going beyond the legislation, really what we are focusing on is looking at other sustainable forms of funding.
So I'm just gonna ask you to be patient with me for 1 second in the eyes, because I want to follow the money for a second. If we're on this trail already, and this is bringing both of you in. I know about the Community Media Act and how that helped to undergird some of print press and go to making sure that the relationship continues and that people receive the funding that's vital to keeping the doors open to keep us informed. So I wonder what that might do in being informative for the legislation that's before the legislature right now, if there are aspects that were in the Community Media Act that might inform what might happen with the television media part of things between Gary and...
Mike, do you want to talk to...
I think there's two things to be thinking about.
Sure.
One is supporting institutions that are already serving community, right? So you look at 5 boroughs. Each of them have pretty vibrant nonprofit organizations who are dominantly funded by cable revenues. And that's a structural problem, because the money that a video consumer now spends mostly goes toward broadband and other apps, OTT, over-the-top video services. And the number of cable subscribers is diminishing by about 5% per year.
Give us an example of an OTT, Mike, just to bring...
Like Peacock,
Okay.
right? Hulu, something that could be on your phone, on a tablet, or
All
installed.
the things you got when they said cut the cord.
Correct. Netflix is the prime example for a lot of people. That's become a dominant form of media delivery for people. The problem with all of those services is they're not local. There's no local content.
Sure.
They're anti-local. They're about obliterating place. Netflix is a transnational conglomerate, right?
Right.
I can see Danish police detective series. I love Borgen, but it won't tell me anything about my neighborhood, right? So that's a structural problem for places like BRIC, but then also places all around the country that have predominantly depended upon franchise fees coming from cable revenue.
Right.
And that's even said an operator, like a Charter or a Comcast, they're still making money on broadband. But because the way the federal law is set up, you can't capture any revenues locally. That's a problem that the federal government created for communities like Brooklyn some 20 years ago.
Right.
So part of what the Investment Act is trying to do is backfill to ensure that those institutions don't disappear. The other thing that I think is curious about this bill is that there are also lots of communities that never took advantage of the opportunity that was in the '84 Cable Act to flex their muscles and negotiate for their community's interest. So there are lots of communities in New York that don't have an institution that looks like BRIC. Okay? They need something like this, right? So the bill sets up a mechanism that brings funding into local communities to be able to have community media centers in places that didn't actually advocate for the founding of a community media center, or maybe didn't have as sort of muscular a relationship with industry as, say, like New York City had, right, to be able to protect and support the institutions that it's got and has had for the last 30 years in many instances. So there's these two different benefits, helping with that structural issue with the cable money, but then also acting as a wellspring to start operations for communities that have need.
Right. So we actually have a little visual representation actually that might show a little means of alternative funding as well, since there are many paths. So this is some of the possibilities beyond what exists right now, including philanthropic grants. We talked about cable franchising a little, government grants, a subscription-based model. There's advertising and underwriting and sponsorship. So Gary, coming from the print media, how many of these little yellow dots have you knocked down to keep the lights on over at the Haitian Times?
Except for cable franchising?
Except for cable franchising, everything. Yeah, so how is the environment out there? Is it pretty cold, or what's happening
Well,
now?
right now, philanthropy, to Mike's point, has begun to have the conversation about local media. Is it a public good? How can we support it? But I'm a bit, skeptical about philanthropy because they don't stay very long in one place, and they just address problems and then move on. So now they are addressing a problem because it is real, but we don't know how much longer they're going to be around. New York City has been able to be very progressive and leading the country in terms of funding local media. When I co-founded the center at CUNY, the dean, she and I did a preliminary research, and we discovered that New York City's 90% of its advertising budget was going to New York Times, Daily News.
Like three institutions were taking up
exactly.
the lion's share of the money.
And so we wrote a report, and this is where academia was important, because that report coming from a university, nobody accuses universities of being advocate for anything. It's just like, this is academic research. So then Mayor de Blasio read it, and he enacted an executive order saying that the city had to spend 50% of its budget on us. Well, we didn't have the capacity to handle 50%, but I don't know where it is now, but we were able to get support from city advertising. But again, there are pitfalls here. The mayor, Adams, just had a budget freeze, and and so there has been, since almost a year now, we haven't had any significant advertising placement in our publications. And so even that's problematic. I do believe, however, that the federal government can really be helpful.
Sure.
And enact. I mean, the thing about it, the federal government has always been active in media since print, because the whole post office rate.
Sure.
That was a government initiative that helped publishers circulate the publication because it was too expensive to send it across the country.
Right.
And then there's been other the whole public notice. Exactly. That was to help media back then. Media has never been successful, particularly local media. It's always struggled,
right,
traditionally, historically. And so now I think we need to look towards government. I mean, I know some people are saying government is not an answer to everything. It's not, but it can help in this case.
When markets fail, government shows up all the time. I mean, we see that with healthcare, we see that with food, we see that with food pricing at times, we see that with oil and gas. I mean, so, if information is the currency we need to make our democracy run correctly,
right,
we need to actually make sure that people have useful information. I mean, but again, we've got to get to that political point. We're nowhere near where we need to be.
Yeah, and these are bailouts that came because of problems they caused within themselves, not because they were attacked.
Massive catastrophic failures occurred that caused these types of bailouts. I mean, I think we're living through a massive catastrophic failure right now when it comes to our information space.
Which is not caused by public media or community media. So please.
Hello, my name is Afia. So when I was listening to you guys talk about community media and mainstream, the first thing that came to my mind was Manufacturing Consent by Noam Chomsky. And then one of you said, I don't remember who, that it's un-American to attack media. But I was just wondering, your opinion, where do we draw the line between demanding better and attacking? Like, where do you cross over?
Say that again, demanding better.
Demanding better from our mainstream media and
Sure.
attacking, like, where do you draw the line between that?
Attacking whom exactly?
I usually draw the line on bringing a mob. I don't bring a mob when I'm trying to help provide criticism and advice. So when we're actually talking about physical threats of violence, no. We're talking about ways that we can better the practice to respect people's humanity. Always, you know. But that's kind of where I draw the line. I mean, and we're seeing threats of physical violence against people who are trying to help our communities.
Well, can I weigh in? Because we were one of those publications that were attacked. So following botched town hall meeting, our editor came back home to Brooklyn, and it was 9:28. She remembered it. She heard a doorbell ring. She thought it was a delivery person. She ignored it. And then it rang again, and she looked out the window. Her house was surrounded by police officers. They were there doing a wellness check because they had gotten a report that someone had been murdered at her address. So this is real.
Yeah.
This is what Mike is talking about. I'm a victim of it. My staff is a victim of it. And there was a woman who was on our panel. Same thing happened to her in Columbus, Ohio. So this is what we're talking about. It's real. This is not sort of like in our head. These things are happening right now. And I've just discovered this whole ecosystem of people who fight against this. I mean, I was telling my wife, this country's civil society is strong. Because that's what's working right now.
Right.
That's what's holding it together. And so there's all these organizations who are there to help us. So we're not alone, but it's a fight.
And this is why it's great when you have multiple community media outlets talking with each other, because you realize this is not just happening to the Haitian community. Like on the long chapter of attacks on journalism and communities, so you think about the intersection of being a journalist and being maybe a person of color or maybe somebody who is part of the LGBTQ plus community, you're just like at the target. So when you have different communities or different nodes or different outlets talking to each other, and maybe someone who's Chinese American is saying, yeah, I have also faced attacks, or maybe someone who's from Venezuela is saying, I have also faced attacks. You start seeing a trend, but you become more powerful when you collaborate because of your full experience. And as again, where you start the story makes such a big difference, because as Gary Pierre said earlier, he didn't start the story a month ago. He started the story 2 years ago.
But you can still critique,
Yes.
right, the journalists or whoever, what they're saying. You are allowed to.
Yeah.
You know, I've actually, I can't remember this reporter's name, from MSNBC, where he had a whole speech about his colleague and how they interviewed Trump and as opposed to other people. So yes, you're still allowed to, but in a civil manner, right?
And I'll add to that, this goes back to like the town square, right? The town square is you are in conversation and someone is back in conversation with you. This is not just something come down from on high saying this is what you have to believe. No, you can push back and people can push back on you, and that is how you have a robust democracy to begin with.
Okay, we're gonna go to you.
Hello. I want to start by saying really great panel tonight, and I'm happy to be here. I have two questions. I don't know if these were answered before I came in a little late to the event. But my first question is, what role can community media play in holding local government accountable and encouraging policy changes that benefit communities? And my second question is, how can community media ensure that a diverse range of perspectives is represented in their content?
I want to go to you, Chief.
I think part of what we do in community media is create spaces where when elections are happening, you get information on what each of these different parties are running on. I've spent time in Manhattan Neighborhood Network. It happens at BronxNet. We do it here in Brooklyn, where they make a conscious effort to reach out to everyone who's running and let them know they should come on, debate, or just talk about what your platform is. And that's part of educating voters on what those who are running for office stand for, what they're going to do when they get elected. The other part of your question, the second part, I think it was, where you ask about representation within media. That's why we exist, so that everyone in this room and everyone who's watching understands diversity happens when we all activate, right? The one thing we always used to say to people is, if you disagree with what you saw on the channel, create a show and share your point of view. And that's how you get the balanced perspective. If you look at our channels and you feel that your community isn't being represented, we're here, we offer the classes, we train you, we support you in the process of creating that content so that the values and the community that you share with others have representation.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, you also asked about how do we keep local elected accountable, right? Well, we did. There's a council member, Matthew Eugene, was elected as the first Haitian American in New York history, elected official. Well, he didn't give a hoot about the Haitian community. And so the Haitian Times went and we did basic reporting. We looked at data where he was giving money. Because as you know, city council members have $1 million discretionary fund. They could do whatever. So we did him. We profiled every elected official in the Haitian neighborhoods. And we saw this. But Matthew Eugene was at a different level. And I'm going to say this, it's not to be divisive or anything, but he was giving it to the Jewish community over at Midwood. That's where the lion's share of the money was going. And so what he did, being the propagandist, he had people call us to complain that we were anti-Jewish. And I told the one caller, I said, nah, don't even go there. Because that's not true. I know what's going on, to stop. So yes, you do reporting, what we call shoe leather reporting. Just get the facts, just analyze it and just present it. And it's interesting because I was in Brooklyn, in Flatbush, talking to a person who's telling me about that story. And I said, so how did you know about it? Oh yeah, I heard about people talking about it. So that's the way we do that, and that's the way we should do it. And I didn't call him a name, although I wanted to, but I didn't. I just said, this is what he did. This is what Councilmember Farrah Lewis spent. This is all of it.
The shoe leather reporting. Yeah. I'm gonna go to you. We're closing in on our last 5 minutes, so let's make it tight.
Hi, my name's My name's Chikava. I'm a community producer here, and I wanted to ask a question and make sure I understood what we're working towards legislatively. We've been funded by cable television, but now we're in this streaming world. So we want to get funding from the streaming side, right?
That's Ritz, if I'm correct, that's in
Great.
that legislation.
So within that, so Spectrum is a cable television, but Spectrum is also my internet service provider.
Indeed.
So why is it also that we're gonna aim to get money from internet service providing dollars? Because, yeah.
So you are a logical person.
Okay.
With the cable bill.
No, because logically, if the world has changed and we still have a need, you'd find a way to be able to translate from one world to the next, right? The federal government in 2002, particularly the FCC in 2002, issued an order which prevented cities from capturing that revenue.
Really?
Right. So what we need is we need people to express an opinion to elected officials to tell them that they need to be exercising their power,
Right.
right? Whether at the State House or in the negotiations with the cable franchises. I think we need to actually probably, states across the country are going to be looking at whether or not they have the ability to be able to do that type of franchising for broadband, because that franchising ensured customer service standards. It ensured that everybody in the community got service, not just people who had money.
So
Right?
it kind
So,
of
like,
sounds to
so-
me like
Yeah.
there was lobbying involved
No,
as the
no,
internet
no,
started.
no. Round up the usual.
As
Yes,
like
that's
the
correct.
people who had
So,
money to
I
look
mean,
that far ahead.
To a certain extent, we're dealing with a legacy issue that is hard to undo at the federal level, because the federal government is profoundly dysfunctional,
So
right? So I
on
think
that, I'm sorry, on
yeah.
the speed of the federal government is profoundly dysfunctional.
yeah.
Full stop. But we are closing in on our promise, what is our last minute and 30 seconds. So I'm going to do the most unfair thing of the evening, with apologies to the folks who've not yet made it to the mic. And I'm going to start with you and just ask a thought to send us home on about why community media is valuable in 4 words or less, a reason for us to keep in the fight.
Yeah, our president, Wes Jackson, likes to say in community media centers like BRIC, we turn people from consumers to producers. And so I would say that with that, community media centers are incredibly valuable because we are bringing folks into not just into the digital age and training them and giving them the expertise to move forward.
She stole half your time.
I don't need much. Basically, my message is that local media has a vital, essential role to play.
Sure.
And we should get the resources to do that, because it has never been more important as it is today.
Mr. Director.
Community media is important because your voices are important. It's the only place where your voices are heard that isn't influenced by corporate entities. And so you want to protect your voice the way you protect your vote and make sure it's always got a presence.
Mikhail.
Community media is for you, by you, support it.
All right, Mike. Oh,
We're the subjects of our own history. We're not objects. We need to tell that story and connect with others to be able to make meaning in the world.
10 years strong, send us home.
I think people are the heart of a country, and because people are the heart, community media is close to that heart. It is where you find honesty, truth, understanding of each other, learning about each other, and if you want to still have that connection to each other, we need to support the community media.
So there you have it. This has been our town hall on community media and democracy. Those things are vitally linked only because these people are vitally involved. Thank you for watching. Take it with you. Okay, this is gonna be like another.